It's with great pleasure now I can introduce Terry Williams, the People Engagement Expert, as our keynote speaker today. Terry is going to be delivering a speech to you or a presentation around adapting a number 8 wire mentality. Terry is a renowned MC, facilitator, trainer, and keynote speaker in the New Zealand business and conference events industry. And as his LinkedIn profile says, he is a people engagement expert. Good morning, Terry. How are you?
I'm well, thank you, Stu.
Fantastic. Terry, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Stu. Welcome along, everybody. Appreciate you coming along here today. Yes, my name is Terry Williams. I am the People Engagement Expert, and I'm here today to talk about engaging remote teams. And in particular, given the economic times and the recovery that we're facing, using a number 8 wire mentality in doing that. Now, obviously, well, not obviously, but many of you will be New Zealanders and you know what the number 8 wire mentality means. Basically making do with what you've got, using resources around you, repurposing things you've got to hand. If you're not from New Zealand and you don't know what that means, another little metaphor would be Macgyvering things. The classic 80s TV character who would be in a perilous situation with nothing but a rubber band, a ballpoint pen, and an aerosol can, puts it all together, and he's got an anti-tank missile at his disposal. So we're not talking about repurposing resources. We're talking about repurposing ideas today, existing leadership ideas, existing teamwork ideas to engage remote teams, which might be new for some of us. But let's have a look at this Kiwi spirit of the number 8 wire mentality. So Kate's a friend of mine, and she was lamenting on Facebook the other day that she'd run out of Baileys. And quick as you'd like, within a couple of hours, she'd worked out how to make it herself. So straight away, instant example of Kiwi number 8 wire spirit. Those of you who turned to home baking in recent weeks might have been aware of the flour shortage that we're supposed to have been experiencing. Well, I was in my own local supermarket in conversation with someone from the bakery department, and I was told that, hey, it's not a flour shortage. There's plenty of flour. It's just that most of the flour was originally sold to restaurants and bakeries, and they're not operating at the moment. So there's plenty of flour. And with everyone at home baking with the kids and such, there's a shortage of the little bags. There's plenty of big bags, but shortage of little bags. So that was the problem they faced. And they could have just lived with that as the problem. But what they did is they asked some questions. They looked at people on the front lines in their teams. And what they found was resources lying around. So within the bakery, who were baking less themselves, they had plenty of these bags for focaccia and sourdough bread. They weren't baking, they weren't selling. And they had these massive bags of flour. So they just put the two together. So they shoveled the flour from the big bags into the small bags, created a product, solved a problem for their customers. I thought it was a great little example of that number 8 wire mentality. Now, next up, we've got another example for a friend of mine. He teaches how to do iPhone videos for your small businesses. At the point of lockdown, a whole bunch of folks stuck where they were. Not everything's an essential service. Can you get the lighting rigs in? Can you buy the various bits and bobs you needed? Or are you stuck with what you've got? And so he was just coming up with ideas like, well, if you need a tripod for your iPhone so you can have these Zoom meetings looking more professional at an eye level and not going up your nostrils, 2 old-fashioned bulldog clips, hook them together, cost you nothing, lying around, great little clever idea there. Repurposing ideas with resources. Now, today I'm not talking about resources, I'm talking about ideas.
Okay, but anyway, whatever.
Talking about ideas. And the reason for this is we're not going to have an expert come and walk in the room at any point soon. There is no Obi-Wan Kenobi who's had all the experience of how do we engage remote teams during an economic recovery after a pandemic. That expertise does not exist. Don't believe anyone when they tell you they've got it. It's far more likely they're this character from the Star Wars movies. So today I'm going to take 3 sets of ideas that already exist for engaging teams, particularly remote teams. Now, it's more in demand now because of the working from home and the Zoom technology and so forth, but these are timeless principles. And the 3 principles I'm going to be looking at is around energy, trust, and influence. And we'll start off by looking at a little bit of research, because when I write my books, generally I take psychological research, which can be a little bit little bit dry, and I try to make it interesting and then make it useful. How can we apply this information in our real world? Now, I want to start by giving you some information, and we'll talk about how useful it is. So, can I have everyone please raise your hand so we can see it on screen? If you're right-handed, raise your right hand. If you're left-handed, raise your left hand. Okay. Everyone's playing, fantastic. Alrighty. So this is known as 2D, 4D. So in the hand on screen, that's my hand. Your 2D finger is your pointy finger. Your 4D finger is your ring finger. So what we're looking at here, if you look at your own hand, you'll be one of three types of people. Your index finger will be longer, or your 4D finger will be longer, or they'll be about the same. So there was a study done in a Welsh hospital, and what they found here illustrates the difference between cause and effect. Now, the length of those two fingers, the relative length of those two fingers, is caused by the amount of testosterone you were exposed to in the womb as a fetus. Now, that's all very interesting. And that's cause. But correlation means that if, like me in that photo, you've got your ring finger is slightly longer than your pointy finger, that correlates to a much lower percentage chance of a heart attack, a higher percentage chance that you'll be quite athletic, and a slightly higher chance that you'll be prone to depression. Now, none of that might be true. It's just correlation. And that's an example of something that's interesting, but you can't really do anything about it. You're stuck with whatever you've got. Best case scenario, it's a conversation starter. So if this was a live event at a conference and we go to break after this point, you'd all be going around comparing each other's hands and having a wee laugh at who's got what in the finger department. That's not what I'm doing today. I'm going to cover off some actual, practical, useful research and then talk through how can you apply this in the real world. And starting off with a bit of research around a fish. This fish is known as the Anna Blip. It's a real fish that exists in South America. Its claim to fame is that it's got 4 eyes. 2 eyes above the waterline. It floats on the surface of the rivers. It's got 2 eyes above the waterline looking out for the birds that hunt it, and 2 eyes below the waterline looking for the fish that it hunts. So to me, that's Mother Nature having a good day at the office. That's evolution knocking it out of the park. So I like to use the Anna Blip as a metaphor for leadership, particularly in engaging remote teams. You need to have one set of eyes totally focused on the task at hand, but another set of eyes on the sidelines, if you like, watching the group dynamic, seeing how people are interacting or not interacting, responding, looking for those subtle clues and cues of feedback that if you're totally focused on the task, you might not notice. Now, a couple of tips and tools around this. When you get the page afterwards from Team Up Events, I've got a bunch of stuff giving away there. One of the links there talks about the 6 thinking hats of Stephen Covey, a bit of a timeless classic. That's one tool you can use. The other one relates to what's known as metacognition. Big word, a lot of syllables. Basically means thinking about thinking. Meta meaning above or beyond. Thinking meaning, well, cognition meaning thinking. So when you're in a meeting, if you're not naturally good at looking for those clues, here's a wee tool you can use. So maybe 20, 25 years ago, I'm starting out, I'm in a meeting, I'm working for an insurance company as a trainer. Other side of the table, typical boardroom table, big old boardroom table, bunch of suits from the computer company. Insurance company is looking for a new computer system. They're trying to sell us one. I'm sitting on the sidelines, junior guy in the room. I'm just watching people. And I notice there's a woman on the other team. And every time she turns a page in her notepad, she strikes a vertical line down the center. She starts taking notes, left, right, left, right, left, turns the page, strikes another vertical line down the center, left, 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 no rights. And turn the page. My mind is totally focused on this. I can think about nothing else. What's the deal with this weird note-taking system that she's got? And I bowl up to her on the break and say, hey, look, you don't know me, I don't know you. We're in opposite teams here. You don't have to tell me anything. But I am dying of curiosity. What's the story with how you're taking notes with the lefts and the rights? And she was happy enough to tell me. And she just basically fessed up that, hey, look, I'm not a naturally emotionally intelligent sort of person. I'm not that great at picking up these sorts of clues and cues of how people are feeling about the discussions or even engaging in the discussions. But what I've learned over my career is that lack has hurt me and held me back. So I've kind of developed this crutch, if you like, this artificial, simple system that forces me to observe what's going on. So the left-hand side of the notes was for facts, and the right-hand side was for feelings. So we might have been talking about the cost per gigabyte of data, for example. So she'd write down X dollars on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, she'd write something like Barry rolls his eyes. And it would remind her to go up to Barry in the break and have a wee conversation. So I've been using that idea. I used it literally for a couple of years, doing the notes and the lefts and the rights. And after a while, you actually internalize that system. And it's like a muscle. If you don't use it, it's hard to use when you need to use it. So with a bit of practice, you can actually get quite expert at being in the now with one set of eyes focused on your task, but also to develop your Anna Blip eyes, your metacognition muscles, and make that little task list. So that's the first tool of the day. Maybe 2 columns, maybe 3 columns with 1 column for an action. Nice and simple. You can teach it to your teammates as well, or the people that you lead, get better results that way. Right, second thing around influence. Second of the 3 key points I'm making today. So this is basically a book report, a book I highly recommend. Again, I'll pop a link to it in the page that you get sent. It's Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion by Dr. Robert Cialdini. And I'll give you a link to a nice little animated summary that summarizes the whole thing. I'll quickly crash through 6 key principles and how you might apply that in your real world of leading remote teams, particularly in this Zoom type environment or similar. So the first element that he talks about, the first principle that he talks about is reciprocity, a basic fundamental psychological need that most of us have to not be in debt to other people. And this is not about bribing people, but let's talk through some of the studies that they did. And the primary one was around waiting staff and tips. And they experimented with a little gift called after dinner mints. So they had a control group who got no mint, and the first group got given 1 mint with the bill, as you normally do. And they received something like a 3% uptick in tips, which is not a lot, but it's probably more than the cost of the mint. They then did a second set where they gave 2 mints, and that resulted in a 12% increase. So that's okay, that's clearly worth 2 mints, that's great. Then they had a bit of innovative thinking, and they did a third set where they gave the 1 mint, and they wandered off for a little, and they sort of snuck back and sort of secret squirrel said, hey, look, you guys have a second mint. And that group, well, like 23% massive spike in tips. So it's just kind of indicative that this reciprocity, and it doesn't have to be a gift, it can be something as simple as praise or feedback. And what they pointed out is it's the way that it's done, that it's not part of a pattern, that it's unexpected, and that it's particular to the person it's being given to. So it might be a bit of a time investment, because ideally on a Zoom meeting, get it done, do it with everyone, get out, get back to work. But there is some wisdom in maybe connecting back to people individually later with a brief follow-up, just to not check in, but just to throw them some feedback, throw them a gift, if you like, to try and stimulate that reciprocity element, that reciprocity principle. Second principle of 6 from the Influence book, scarcity. People feel greater value towards something of which there isn't much left. And the classic marketing example is for a limited time only. We've done brain scans on people tasting wine and cookies. That's just a study we'd all like to sign up for. And it turns out that the last glass in a bottle and the last cookie in a jar does actually taste better, and we perceive it as such. The study they talk about is Concord, where the moment it wasn't going to be financially viable, they shut down or announced they were shutting down the service, and straight away ticket sales went through the roof. And if ticket sales had been at that level, they would not have had to shut it down. Same happened in New Zealand, not with Concord, obviously. Our equivalent of Concord in New Zealand was snifters. And same situation, no one was buying them, been around forever, so they announced they're going out of business, and straight away sales through the roof. I personally was outraged, how dare they? And of course, after I started hoarding snifters, I realized that I hadn't bought a snifter in 15 years and I was part of the problem. So scarcity, how can we apply that in leading our remote teams? Well, I guess the 2 elements here is that are scarce, over which you have some control, is together time and your own time. So to create an appreciation in the minds of your people that this time is limited and it's important. And same with you. So not necessarily being a bit of a diva about it, that you're actually being a martyr at giving up your time to your people, but just to let your people know that you've got other fish to fry and they're making and a real gift to you, a real effort for you to give you that time and attention. And that's true in the real world as it is with remote teams, but it's particularly true with remote teams. Okay, third element of 6 from the principles of persuasion, authority. And the studies show here that, for example, physiotherapy patients were way more inclined to actually do their homework like they're supposed to when the physiotherapist had their qualifications on the wall behind them. In fact, sometimes my virtual backgrounds have my degrees on the wall behind me, and I certainly have my books, for example, thrown up there, sometimes a name drop quote from a client and things like that, which are things that I do to hopefully subtly and not too obviously just drop a bit of a hint that I know what I'm talking about, that I've got some credibility. Another study found that real estate firms where the receptionist was trained to not just put calls through, but drop a quick little sentence in, like, I'll put you through to Paul. He's had 20 years experience selling houses in your area. And they experienced a very significant increase in both connections and contracts and price of contracts as a result of that experiment. So what's your version of that? How can you drop in some credibility when you are talking with people at a distance? And I think the trick here for you is stories and anecdotes, micro anecdotes, just to say, when you connect with someone online, I was just dealing with Rachel, we talked about this, just to drop in that you've been helping some other people as well, and maybe act as a bit of a connector between the Rachels and the person you're currently dealing with. How can you establish that authority? Also, reporting any particular, even mini successes since you've last connected will be another way of leveraging that principle. Next one, consistency. People have a fundamental drive to behave in a way that doesn't contradict the way that we've recently behaved. Now, in this study, they asked a control group if they'd like to put a very large road safety billboard on their front yard, a bit of an imposition, and only a tiny fraction of people agreed to doing that. A second group were also asked to do that, but they had previously, 1 month earlier, been asked to put a tiny sticker in their window promoting road safety. And that group agreed 4 times as often to put the big sign up in their yard. So there's other studies they cite, but the basic principle there is we are more inclined to continue with a behavior when we believe we've already made a bit of a start. So in leading your remote teams, engaging your remote teams, let's not leap to the big ask. Now, if you've got a big ask and it's not time critical, let's drip feed this in. Let's maybe ask, get a bit of a shallow end approach rather than a deep end approach. What can you do in a small way to move them up to the big thing rather than just sudden immersion and getting a bit of a shock because it's nothing they've done previously. Okay, last principle, second to last principle is consensus. What's everyone else doing? More specifically, what's everyone else like me doing, or everyone else whose opinion I care about doing? So the classic study they talk about here is around hotel towel reusage, where most people when asked won't. Some people when asked and told about the environmental benefits will give it a go. But if you actually say 75% of people in this room will reuse their towels, that creates close to 1/3 of people reusing their towels. So how can you communicate to your remote team what other people are doing and succeeding at, what tools and resources they're gaining, just to sort of get that, what you're looking for is momentum, a critical mass, a tipping point. You're not going to get everybody all the time, but can you get that momentum? Where's that evidence? And again, just dropping in a story or a micro anecdote, or if you give them some advance notice, maybe bringing on someone else who doesn't speak up all the time, just to give them a little bit of a moment, or even providing a report if they're not up for speaking in front of the group. The problem with consensus is it cuts both ways. If everyone else is doing it and it's not a good thing, you need to step in there because you're not the only influencer in the group. So the study here, I actually discovered myself, was around a grad student interning at Yellowstone National Park, and they had a litter problem. So her approach to that was to build this giant cage outside the entranceway, and she filled it full of garbage, and put a sign out the front of the cage as people came in and bought their tickets. This amount of garbage is dumped in Yellowstone National Park every day. Basically trying to guilt shame everybody into not doing it. After a month, she worked out what the change in trash dumping behaviour was, and thanks to her efforts, trash dumping actually increased by 300%. So that's that influence thing. Everyone else is doing it. There's no diffusion of guilt, diffusion of responsibility. My little Coke can isn't going to make a big difference to this massive pile of garbage. So, keep your Anna Blip eyes, again, open for what's going on. Take little pulse checks. Check in with people who are opinion leaders or opinion observers if, as the leader, you're not really able to get an accurate, honest, or complete view of that. And I'll throw you a tool at the end of my presentation around an assessment checklist you might use for that sort of thing. Okay, last influence principle. This is liking, or likeness, as I call it. It's not liking as in I'm your friend, you're my friend, we influence each other. That's clearly true, but that's not this point. And it's more about finding common ground, accelerating rapport by connecting with people. A little bit like Stu was talking about at the start of his presentation today, connect before you communicate. It's not just idle chit-chat. There is a dollar, tangible, demonstrable benefit for this. Harvard Business School study sent out a bunch of folks to do some negotiations. Half were told, no chit-chat, time is money, straight to business. And half were told, hey man, don't start talking business until you find at least two things in common personally with the other party. Now, the bean counters amongst us might think that first group, time is money, no chit-chat, would get better results. But thankfully for the non-bean counters amongst us, that second group, who didn't even start talking business until they found at least two things in common with the other negotiator, the connectors before the communicators, they made 35% more deals with an average greater value of 19%. Now, money's not everything, but it's perhaps an indicator that there's some value in your remote teams in making that connection, not just something that randomly happens when you've got time, but you actually proactively have a system or a diary reminder to connect and ask. And the key there is just curiosity, checking in, asking questions, remembering what you asked last time by taking notes and checking back in again with people. Now, the reason I've got basketball up there is I had a very recent example where completely innocently, without even my manipulative salesman hat on, I scored a deal by this likeness principle. So I was in negotiation with a CEO to present to his group, and I was arranging a meeting, and he agreed to meet, but at kind of a weird location that I thought wasn't really convenient for either of us. And on arrival, I was curious, so I asked the question, hey man, why are we meeting here? And it turned out it was convenient for him because he was coming back from Hamilton because he was applying for funding for his side hustle, which was basketball administration. Oh, basketball. I have an interest in basketball. I asked him a basketball question. And then it dropped out that back in the late 80s, I played 2 years of National League basketball. I knew some people. He knew some people. Pretty quickly, we'd stopped talking about what we'd started talking about in terms of the gig. And I got the gig. So this likeness thing is actually a really powerful tool. Again, don't be evil, don't be manipulative, but do be proactive and systematic about it. If you just wait till you remember, like most of us, you won't remember. Now, a couple of tools I want to finish up on here, and I'll throw you back to Stu, is around trust and likeness. So likeness is easy to say, and when you're randomly meeting people, like my client example, obviously curiosity and asking questions and taking notes is the way to go. But a technique I've found that's really useful as an exercise for an existing team, whether you're either the leader or a member of it, is this concept called the one-page personal user manual. And again, the page link that'll get sent to you, there'll be an electronic online version and a downloadable paper one-page PDF version as well to have a play with yourself or distribute to your team. So this is absolutely stolen from the US Marines. And we think of Marines, we think boot camp, we think weapons training, but there's also a lot of psychology there, a lot of team building where your life depends on each other. So really, when they're assigned to a unit, every member of that unit gets this one pager and it asks them questions about themselves. Pretty basic questions, but having said that, maybe not questions we've even thought about for our own personality operating system. If you grind the gears of your colleagues, that's not great in a workplace situation. It's clearly terrible in a combat situation. So we can take some learning from these folks. So what's your style? What do you value? What don't you have patience for? How best to communicate with you? How to help you? And what people misunderstand about you. So if you can do that remotely or face-to-face and share that one page with everybody else, it's a useful conversation and a useful resource. So that's available for you guys after this program. And lastly, trust, building a team trust culture. Now, clearly that's important generally, but it's mission critical in a remote team, whether you're separated by geography or whether you're separated over the clock if you're in a multi-shift day. You're not physically present for those folks. You don't want to micromanage, but at the same time, you've got to keep on top of things. So at some point, they'll be on their own. And depending on whether they're senior, junior, or whatever their performance levels, you'll have different levels of intervention and observation. So the form that I'll send you on that page will contain this 15-point checklist, and it's constructed in the form of a form, so you can complete your own scores, if you like, and then provide some evidence that you're actually doing those things. And if you can't provide the evidence that you're doing it, well, I guess you're not doing it then, are you? And you can also print out more or send more to your team, because the key here, I guess, is the difference between your perspective of how the team culture is in terms of trust and everybody else's. Because as a coach of many people over the years, that's perhaps one of the most daunting, sometimes uncomfortable, but most helpful things to learn is the difference between your opinion of how it's going and their opinion of how it's going. And what I'm not suggesting with this is that you should score 100% on all 15 trust criteria, because that's expensive in terms of time and effort, and it's hard to maintain. One of the things you might like to think about in conversation with your team is, where do you want to be? So you're creating an A and a B, a point A and a point B. Where are we now? A baseline, a benchmark when it comes to trust in the team, and where do we want to be? In a critical third part, how do we work together to move from A to B? So it's not all on you to do the heavy lifting. You can simply conduct the orchestra for them to come up with their own ideas as well. All those tools, all the things that I've talked about in my session today, they'll be put on a single page, and Team Up Events will send that to you after it's all completed today. I hope it's been helpful. I've tried to make it as practical, real world as possible. And clearly I've banged through at a rate of knots. I always try and be a lot more interactive than this, but you all appear from what I'm looking at to be paying attention, or you've put up a virtual background of yourself looking like you're paying attention, which from my perspective is much the same thing. So I'll throw you back to Stu. Thank you so very much for your time and attention this morning, everybody.
Thanks very much, Terry, and I'm sure everyone will join me in a virtual round of applause. Some fantastic insights there into how we can adopt this number 8 wire mentality when it comes to engaging our remote teams.